to the political ones no longer allow a compartmentalized approach. He wrote this in the 60s, 65. So he was aware that categorizing forms of media was something that didn't it wasn't fair to the whole artistic production. But so here is some ideas that I think deserve some thought today as well. He designed this type of intermediate genre, and some of those circles with question marks, because he knew that the more other styles will come later on and will not fit into the mainstream. So I think this is a key figure into experimental poetic practices and how do we approach them. Okay. Another artist and also critic of art in a way was Vasily Kandinsky. In 1926, Kandinsky was talking about the subjective effects, the inner effects of art. He said that every phenomenon can be experienced in two ways. These two ways are not arbitrary. These two ways are either external or inward. Aside from its scientific value, which depends upon an exact dissemination of the individual art elements, the analysis of the art elements forms a bridge to the inner pulsation of a work of art. So he was very focused on the energies of the line, of the point, of the shape, of the plane, proportion, color. All of these abstract things convey meaning directly without the use of words or without pictorial representation. So, and he was saying this at the beginning of the 20th century, and I think it's very valid, especially if we think of embodied cognition theories. So we will, I think this is a key figure as well we need to take into account when talking about experimental poems, because they are also made of lines and shapes and colors and okay. So here we have another slide with what exactly did he mean by a point, a line, a plane. He said that a point is a small bit of color put by the artist on the canvas. It is neither a geometric point nor a mathematical abstraction. It is extension, form, and color. It can be isolated or resonate with other points or lines. Then a line is the product of a force which has been applied in a given direction. And we have a straight line, an angular line, a curved line. All of them produce different types of meanings. And a plane may be obtained by condensation from a line rotated around one of its ends. So he was very aware of little things that we never study because for us, I mean, unless we consider them science. Okay. Well, and he keeps going, writing about different types of lines and forces. And then at the end of this slide, he says, the basic plane is a living being, which the artist fertilizes and feels breathing. He starts talking about breathing as well, the role of breathing in the artist itself. So, okay. And then we have another literary scholar, Dondis. She's from Latin America, and she uses, in part, in her studies, she uses Gestalt as well, and binary oppositions, in order to study the images. So she says that understanding through seeing only seems to be an obviously intuitive process. Actually, developing the visual sense is something like learning a language with its own special alphabet, lexicon, and syntax. So the artists and this literary critics, they are starting to realize that there are other languages beyond the verbal one. The most studied one is the verbal language, the verbal thinking, but also I would say that the second more studied is the visual thinking as well. Okay. Another approach is from the visual arts scene. Johanna Drucker, she has many books. Some of them deal only with the evolution of the typography and the materiality of the letters. But she also talks about visual arts discourses. I think she's also a very useful critic in order to approach experimental problems. Oof, I think I am going beyond the 20 minutes. Oh, sorry. Okay. One of her books is Graphesis, Visual Forms of Knowledge Production. Here she fuses digital humanities, media studies, and graphic design history to provide a descriptive, critical language for the analysis of graphical knowledge. And she outlines the principles by which visual formats organize meaningful content, particularly the graphical user interface. Okay, Another scholar, Catherine Hayes. I think it's important what she talked about information materiality. Usually, these two concepts were separated, and information tends to be more important than materiality. And she's against this type of erasure of embodiment. She thinks that we need to include the materiality of the language and of the culture. It's as important as information, and she says that information and material must not be separated. We have to put back into the picture the flesh that continues to be erased in contemporary discussions about cybernetic subjects, for instance. So it seems that many theorists, many scholars are going to the materiality, to the I would say non-intellectual parts that were kind of disregarded. Another approach is the concept of intermediality is also another valid term for studying experimental poetry. So we must not identify poetry as lyric only. Poetry goes beyond the lyric discourses. The functional instability of poetry as a genre, the functional instability of lyric as a discursive category today, the constitution of new subjects and new subjectivities, the function of the poetic in public space. So this research group, LICTEC, from the Universidad de Santiago and Palma de Mallorca, they are studying experimental poetry from this type of intermediary concept of science. Then we have another approach or framework, frame semantics. And a frame is considered as any system of concepts related in such a way that to understand any of them, you have to understand the whole structure in which it fits. So the concept frames apply to verbs like by to represent relationships between syntax and semantics. They establish relationships. This approach could be partially valid also for experimental poetry. And then another approach is cognitive approaches from, like this scholar Hiraga, his book Metaphor and Iconicity, a cognitive approach to analyzing visual texts. He explores why a certain text has a specific form, whether oral, structural, visual, to convey certain meanings. So the interplay of metaphor and iconicity goes from sound symbolism and parallelism in poetic discourse to word order, semantic change, writing systems, and electronic communication. This study argues against the dominant form of language as portrayed by Saussure, that sees the linguistic sign as primarily non-iconic or arbitrary. So, Then another concept, embodied cognition by Mike Orchard. he did his dissertation and his studies on embodied cognition. I think they are very relevant to experimental poetry in general, because he is including aspects of the body, like the motor system, the perceptual system, the body's interaction with the environment. All of them are aspects of cognition that in the past were disregarded. So these are categories that we should include in the analysis of experimental poetry. He says, for instance, that visual poetry relies primarily on a materialistic view of the written language, in which the formal features of letters, words, the page, and even the book are important components of the poetic meaning. Bodily engagements with the environment develop image schematic, imagistic, and other experiential components that are essential to the construction of meaning. So we are seeing more and more critics, including more categories of study that were disregarded years and decades ago. Okay. He says that through an embodied view of meaning, which includes but is not totalized and subsumed in language and symbols, the complexity of the materialist aesthetic found in visual poetry